The halls of King's Landing were quieter than usual. The war was over, or at least, that's what the city kept telling itself. The Iron Throne still stood, stained with too much blood, and though peace had returned, it was a fragile thing, one crack away from falling apart. Sansa Stark, no longer the naive girl who had once dreamed of marrying a prince, now walked the halls with the poise of a northern wolf. Her red hair braided tight, her eyes colder than the winters of Winterfell, she had changed. And so had Jaime Lannister. He had returned to the capital not for Cersei, not for power, but for redemption. After losing his hand, his father, and eventually his sister, who had died beneath the rubble of the Red Keep, Jaime had wandered, broken. But something inside him still burned. A desire to be someone else. Someone better. Their paths crossed again at a council meeting. Sansa, representing the North, and Jaime, now acting as a kind of advisor to Queen Daenerys, who still ruled but with far less fire than before. The moment Sansa saw him, she narrowed her eyes. She remembered too well who he was, what he'd done. The man who pushed her brother from a tower. The man who served the woman who had tormented her. But also, the man who had turned against Cersei. The man who had stood against his own family. She couldn't decide if she hated him or pitied him. Lady Stark, he said with a slight nod, eyes not cold, but tired. Sir Jaime, she replied, lips thin, voice sharp. They barely spoke that day, but something had been set in motion. Something no one expected, not even them. Over the next few months, as politics twisted and alliances shifted, Sansa and Jaime found themselves in the same rooms more than they liked. Negotiations. Councils. Celebrations. Winter was approaching again, and with it came the fear of another war. They talked more. At first, their words were sharp, like blades scratching old wounds. But with time, there was something else beneath their sarcasm, understanding. Sansa saw it before she could admit it. Jaime Lannister wasn't the Golden Lion anymore. He was broken, wounded, and trying. He didn't want praise. He didn't want to be feared. He just wanted peace, like her. Tyrion noticed it too. His once wife, though their marriage was never consummated, now laughed, lightly, at Jaime's quiet jests. She defended him when others questioned his loyalty. And Jaime? He looked at her like she was the last honest thing in the world. One evening, deep within the gardens of the Red Keep, they sat on a stone bench beneath the fading orange sky. It was the first time they had spoken without duty between them. "You hate me," Jaime said suddenly, breaking the silence. Sansa looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "I did." He nodded, staring at his metal hand. "That's fair. But I don't anymore," she added quietly. A silence settled between them again, heavier now. Sansa's voice was softer when she spoke next. "I think you hate yourself more than I ever could." His smile was bitter. "You're probably right. I've hated myself too," she whispered. "For letting them use me. For believing their lies. For not seeing the monsters behind their masks." He looked at her then, really looked. "You were a child." "And you were not," she replied, unflinching. He lowered his head. "I know." That was the moment something shifted. Not love. Not yet. But something deeper than hate. A mutual understanding. The slow crumbling of walls built by trauma, pride, and history. Tyrion watched it unfold from afar. At first, he told himself it was nothing. Jaime was kind to everyone. Sansa was polite out of duty. But eventually, he saw the glances, the subtle smiles, the quiet comfort between them. And he knew. The man who had protected him all his life, might just be the man meant for the one woman Tyrion could never have. One night, Tyrion asked her plainly, "Do you love him?" Sansa didn't answer. She simply walked away. But Tyrion was no fool. Whispers began to swirl in the corridors of the Red Keep. Servants who once bowed in silence now gossiped behind closed doors. Rumors had a way of crawling through the cracks of King's Landing, and it didn't take long before the name Sansa Stark started appearing in hushed conversations alongside Sir Jaime Lannister. The wolf and the lion, again, but not in war this time. In something far more scandalous. Sansa heard them. She heard every rumor, every mocking laugh that followed her in the halls. It reminded her too much of the old days, the court life under Joffrey, the silent torment under Cersei. But this time, she wasn't the girl who cried at every whisper. She held her chin high, and walked through the fire with her head unbowed. Jaime heard the talk too. He had once cared what people thought, back when being the Kingslayer still hurt him. Now he cared only about one thing, truth. And the truth was, he didn't know when it had happened, when looking at Sansa became easier than sleeping, when speaking to her felt safer than silence. He didn't even know if it was love. Maybe it was just understanding. Or maybe he'd finally found someone whose pain reflected his own. The Queen had noticed too. Daenerys Targaryen was no fool. Her position on the throne was secure, but only just. Her claim was constantly challenged by those who feared her dragons more than they respected her bloodline. She had lost many allies in the war, and she could not afford more political shifts. A Lannister growing close to the Lady of Winterfell? That was dangerous. Even if Jaime no longer bore his family's name with pride, he still carried it like a shadow. She summoned Sansa one morning to her chambers. The room was filled with warmth from the crackling hearth, but the tension between them was cold. "You and Sir Jaime have grown close," Daenerys said, not bothering to veil the accusation. Sansa remained calm, her hands folded neatly. "We've spoken, yes. He is kinder than most men here." "Kindness is not what concerns me," the Queen replied, her eyes sharp. "Perception does." Sansa tilted her head slightly. "You mean your perception? Or the people's?" Daenerys's eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer that. "Jaime Lannister is a complicated man. So are you, Lady Stark. That complication makes people uneasy." Sansa smiled faintly. "Then let them be uneasy. I'm not here to make them comfortable." Daenerys didn't press further, but the message was clear. If Sansa kept walking this path, she would be walking it alone. Later that evening, Sansa stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The wind tugged at her cloak, and she wrapped it tighter around herself. Below her, the lights of King's Landing flickered like stars, but none of it felt like home. Home was Winterfell. Cold, proud, quiet. This place was a golden cage. "You shouldn't be out here alone," came a voice behind her. She turned to find Jaime, a little breathless from the climb. His hair was longer now, less polished, like the rest of him. He was shedding his golden armor more and more these days. "I'm used to being alone," she said. "I know," he replied gently. "That's why I came." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city buzzed far beneath them, distant and irrelevant. "I spoke with the Queen today," Sansa said quietly. "And?" Jaime asked. "She's worried. About appearances. About us." He looked down, hand resting on the cold stone. "So are you?" Sansa shook her head slowly. "No. I've learned not to care about what people think. It's a waste of time." Jaime smiled faintly, a tired smile. "You've grown stronger than any of them." She looked at him then, eyes softening. "Not stronger. Just smarter." There was a pause. "She asked me to distance myself from you." Jaime didn't respond. He didn't flinch or show any surprise. He just nodded. "Then maybe I should go." Sansa stepped forward, her voice firm. "Do you want to?" He met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. "No," he said simply. But I will, if you ask. The wind howled between them, sharp and cold. But Sansa didn't shiver. She reached out and touched his hand, his only hand, her fingers brushing his knuckles. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something older than that. Something deeper. Trust. I don't want you to go, she said. He looked down at her hand, then back at her. Then I'll stay. In that moment, something changed. Not just between them, but inside them. Jaime was no longer the man defined by his sins. And Sansa, for the first time in years, felt like she wasn't standing alone in the dark. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy with meaning. Sansa and Jaime no longer pretended to be strangers passing in the same corridors. They didn't avoid eye contact during council meetings. They spoke openly now, sometimes about politics, sometimes about the war, and sometimes about nothing at all. That nothing was what Sansa valued most. It meant peace. A rare and unfamiliar thing for both of them. But peace is never left untouched in King's Landing. It's always a temporary visitor. Tyrion had kept his silence. He hadn't confronted Jaime, and he hadn't questioned Sansa again. He was too smart for that. But silence didn't mean ignorance. He watched. He noticed every stolen glance, every late-night walk in the gardens, every meeting that ran longer than necessary. He told himself he didn't care. He reminded himself that Sansa had never been his to begin with. But knowing something and accepting it are two different things. One evening, over a table of wine and candles, Tyrion invited Jaime to drink. Just like old times. You're quiet these days, Tyrion said, pouring the wine generously. Jaime raised a brow. So are you. Tyrion smiled, but there was something bitter under it. I suppose we're both getting old. They drank for a while, the silence between them no longer comfortable but tense. Finally, Tyrion spoke what had been burning on his tongue for weeks. Do you love her? Jaime didn't look surprised. I don't know. But you could. Jaime didn't deny it. Tyrion let out a long breath, then nodded. She was never mine. You know that. Not really. I know, Jaime said. And still, it hurts, Tyrion added, quietly, like he hated himself for admitting it. Jaime leaned back, his voice calm. I didn't go looking for this. No one ever does, Tyrion replied, finishing his cup. That's what makes it real. Meanwhile, Sansa was dealing with her own battles. Word from the north had arrived. Arya had sailed further west, chasing unknown lands. Bran was still in Winterfell, silent and strange as ever. But it was the letter from Jon that made her stomach twist. Trust no one in the south. Power poisons. I've seen it. She folded the letter slowly, her hands cold. Jon never liked Jaime. He never said it openly, but it was there, in the way he looked at him, always with suspicion. Sansa had once agreed. Now. She wasn't sure anymore. Jaime wasn't like other men. He didn't pretend to be noble. He didn't make grand speeches about honor. But in his silence, in the way he listened to her when others didn't, that was more honest than any vow she'd heard from a knight. Later that night, Sansa found Jaime alone in the training yard. He still practiced, though his sword hand was gone. He trained with his left now, and he had become skilled, fierce even. She watched him in the moonlight, the sweat on his brow, the focus in his eyes. He looked more like a man than a legend. More scarred, more flawed, more real. I got a letter from Jon, she said, stepping into the yard. He stopped, lowering the sword and wiping his brow. Good news? Not exactly. He warns me about men like you. Jaime didn't flinch. Then he's smart. Sansa frowned. Why don't you defend yourself? He looked at her, his eyes tired. Because I'm done proving things to people who already made up their minds. She stepped closer. And what about me? Have I made up my mind? He hesitated. No. You look at me like you're still deciding if I'm worth the risk. Sansa's voice dropped. And are you? He stepped closer too now, the space between them narrowing. I've killed kings. I've lied. Betrayed. Lost everything. But with you. I want to be better. I don't know if that's enough. But it's all I have. Her breath caught. He had never said anything like that before. Not to her. Not to anyone, she guessed. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers brushing the faint scar that ran down his cheek. Then start with this. Stop pushing me away. I'm not. Yes, you are. You think if you keep your distance, you'll protect me from what you've been. But Jaime. I've been surrounded by monsters all my life. You're not one of them anymore. He stared at her, stunned. And in that quiet moment, he leaned forward, not rushed, not desperate, and pressed his forehead against hers. Not a kiss. Just closeness. Trust. Fragile, trembling, but real. The bond was no longer just growing. It was rooting. And in a city that thrived on masks and lies, that truth between them was dangerous. By the time the first frost touched the southern gardens of King's Landing, whispers had turned to warnings. The court was shifting again. Alliances grew tense. Old loyalties cracked beneath the weight of quiet betrayal. And at the center of it all, Sansa Stark and Jaime Lannister stood too close for anyone's comfort. Lady Olenna might have been gone, but the memory of her words echoed through the halls. The people of this city love their scandals more than their queens. The queen knew it too. And Daenerys was growing uneasy. Sansa had been summoned again, this time not to speak, but to listen. You are not a prisoner here, Lady Stark, Daenerys said, her voice careful, too calm. But sometimes, even freedom has limits. Especially when it threatens peace. Sansa raised her chin. And what peace is that, Your Grace? The kind where we all pretend to be loyal while plotting in the shadows? Daenerys's lips tightened. Do not mistake my patience for weakness. And don't mistake my silence for submission, Sansa replied. The queen stood. You're playing a dangerous game, Sansa. Sansa didn't flinch. So are you. There was no screaming. No outbursts. Just quiet fury between two powerful women who had grown tired of being underestimated. That night, Jaime found her in the God's Wood, what little was left of it in the south. A single heart tree, twisted and tired, stood in the garden. She sat beneath it, arms wrapped around her knees, lost in thought. She's going to move against me, Sansa said without looking up. Jaime knelt beside her. Then let her. You don't understand. If she feels I'm a threat, she won't stop at warnings. He nodded slowly. Then we leave. She turned to him, startled. Leave? King's Landing. The South. All of it. You'd abandon your post. Your redemption. He shrugged. I never asked for redemption. Not really. And I've never been good at following orders. Sansa shook her head. It's not that simple. She's the queen. She has dragons. And I have, you. He looked at her then, something raw in his eyes. And I'll stand between you and anything that comes. Dragons, queens, shadows. I'll burn before I let them touch you. For the first time in a long time, Sansa felt fear, not of death or betrayal, but of losing something that had become real. Later that week, the queen made her move. At the next council meeting, with all eyes watching, Daenerys spoke with cold grace. There are rumors of disloyalty within my court. Emotional alliances that threaten political stability. Sansa, seated across the table, met her gaze without blinking. I have offered mercy, Daenerys continued, but I will not offer it again. Tyrion shifted in his chair. Varys said nothing. Grey Worm stood at attention, eyes fixed straight ahead. Then Daenerys dropped the final stone. Sir Jaime Lannister. You are hereby relieved of your duties as Queen's advisor. You will be confined to quarters until further notice. The room went silent. Jaime stood slowly, his face unreadable. On what grounds? On grounds of conflict of interest, Daenerys said. And, questionable loyalty. Sansa rose to her feet. This is a mistake. No, Daenerys said, turning to her. The mistake was allowing this charade to continue. Tyrion stood next. Your Grace, please. But the Queen cut him off with a glare. Jaime didn't fight it. He simply turned, walked out with guards behind him, his golden hand glinting in the torchlight. Sansa watched him go, her fists clenched. That night, she went to him. The guards hesitated, but they let her pass. She entered the stone chamber and found Jaime sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I'm sorry, she whispered. He looked up. Don't be. This is my fault. No. This is who she is. I saw it in her eyes long ago. Fire is not mercy, Sansa. It's destruction dressed in glory. She sat beside him. What do we do? He took her hand in his. We leave. Tonight. Before she decides your silence is treason. Sansa looked down. If I run again, the North will see me as weak. They'll question everything I've built. Jaime squeezed her hand. Then don't run. But don't wait for her to turn on you either. Go back north. Take what's yours. I'll come with you. She looked into his eyes and asked the question neither of them had dared to say aloud. Why? Jaime's answer was soft, almost broken. Because I belong with you more than I ever did in this cursed city. Before the sun rose over the spires of King's Landing, Sansa Stark and Jaime Lannister were already gone. No fanfare. No goodbye. Just a whisper in the halls that spread like wildfire, the wolf has fled. The Kingslayer rides with her. Daenerys's fury was immediate. She called an emergency council. Tyrion stood silent, caught between loyalty and blood. Grey Worm demanded they be pursued. Varys warned against it, speaking calmly of strategy and alliances. But the Queen only heard one thing, betrayal. And betrayal could not be forgiven. Meanwhile, far from the capital, two cloaked riders moved swiftly through the woods. Sansa had traded her fine dresses for furs and leather. Her hair, usually braided in the northern style, now hung loose beneath her hood. Jaime, dressed in simple armor, looked less like a knight and more like a man finally free of his chains. They didn't speak much that first day. Words weren't needed. The silence between them was full of trust. On the second day, they rested by a frozen river. As they made a small fire, Sansa finally broke the silence. Do you regret it? Jaime glanced at her. What? Leaving? She nodded. No, he said without hesitation. But I'm afraid for you. She looked at him, her face unreadable. I'm not a little bird anymore, Jaime. I can handle what's coming. He nodded. I know. But that doesn't mean I won't worry. She smiled faintly. Good. I'd rather ride beside someone who worries than someone who only follows orders. That night, under the stars, their hands brushed near the fire. It wasn't planned. It wasn't forced. But neither of them pulled away. Winter had come early in the Riverlands. Snow fell as they approached the Trident, and the wind howled through the trees like a warning. At a small village inn, they found shelter. The innkeeper didn't recognize them, and for the first time in years, Sansa and Jaime shared a room not as lord and lady, not as enemies or strangers, but as two people with nothing left to lose. As they sat before the fireplace, Jaime spoke softly. I never thought I'd be here. With you. Like this. Sansa looked over. You thought you'd die in the south? I thought I'd die beside her, he admitted. Cersei. Sansa didn't look away. But you didn't. No, he said. I chose something else. She watched the flames for a moment. Do you ever miss her? He was quiet. No. I miss who I thought she was. Not who she became. Sansa nodded. I used to love Joffrey. Or, I thought I did. Jaime let out a dry laugh. Gods, we were both blind. Not anymore. There was a long pause. Then Jaime stood, crossed the room, and sat beside her. He reached out slowly, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. You saved me, Sansa. Her breath caught. I didn't do anything. You saw me, he said. Not the Kingslayer. Not the Lannister. Just me. She stared at him, heart pounding. And you didn't flinch when you saw who I'd become. Not a little girl. Not a helpless thing. No, he whispered. I saw a queen. Their lips met, not with hunger, but with a quiet desperation. A promise. A beginning. The kiss was gentle, steady, and when they pulled apart, there was no need for words. They already understood. In the morning, Sansa woke to the sound of crows outside. Jaime was already up, sharpening his blade. He looked over as she stirred. 2 more days, and we'll reach Moat Cailin, he said. From there, Winterfell is close. Sansa nodded. Do you think they'll welcome you? I think they'll try to kill me, he said with a wry smile. She stood, wrapped herself in her cloak, and stepped closer to him. Let them try. I'll stand between you and any sword that's raised. You shouldn't have to, he murmured. But I want to, she replied. And with that, they set out again, snow falling heavier now. The road home was cold and uncertain, but the warmth between them never faded. Behind them, in King's Landing, Daenerys sent ravens north with a message, bring back the traitors. Dead or alive. The hunt had begun. But the north is not a land that bends easily. And Sansa Stark was not a woman who would bow again. The wind was sharper now, slicing through their cloaks as they rode past the broken stones of Moat Cailin. Snow fell in thick silence. The north was reclaiming its voice, and it whispered of war, of ghosts, and of home. Winterfell loomed ahead like a memory reborn. The tall grey walls dusted with snow, the banners of the direwolf still waving proudly in the bitter air. But inside those walls, not everyone was ready to welcome what approached. Bran Stark had seen it before they arrived. In his quiet, unblinking way, he had known. Arya had returned days earlier from her latest voyage, colder, leaner, sharper. She stood at the gates now, watching the riders approach, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. Sansa dismounted first. She looked thinner, older, her eyes harder than the girl Arya remembered. Jaime followed her, slow but strong, one golden hand glinting in the pale light. Arya stepped forward and looked at him with no greeting. You've got some nerve riding into the north. Jaime didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth hung between them like fog. Sansa stepped between them. He's here as my guest. Under my protection. Your protection doesn't erase what he's done, Arya said coldly. To our family. Sansa's voice didn't waver. And mine doesn't forget what he's done for us, either. He fought at Winterfell. He bled for the living. Arya narrowed her eyes. Are you in love with him? Sansa didn't blink. Yes. It was the first time she had said it aloud. Jaime glanced at her, breath catching. Arya looked from one to the other, then slowly turned and walked back inside without another word. Later that night, the great hall felt heavy, thick with silent judgment. The northern lords had gathered. Many of them eyed Jaime with suspicion. Some with outright contempt. But none dared raise a sword, not yet. Not while he sat beside the Lady of Winterfell. Bran sat in his chair near the fire, staring at nothing and everything all at once. He finally spoke. You saw the worst in each other, and yet chose the best. That is not common. Tormund Giantsbane scoffed from the side. So the Kingslayer's now the wolf's mate? Never thought I'd see that day. He's not my mate, Sansa replied coolly. He's my choice. That made the room fall even quieter. Jon Snow hadn't yet returned from the wall, but his absence only made the weight of Sansa's words feel heavier. She wasn't asking for approval. She was declaring. And the North listened, even if it didn't agree. Jaime kept mostly quiet. He knew this wasn't his place. He wasn't here to convince them. He was here for her, and he would take their scorn 1,000 times over for the chance to stand beside her freely. That night, as the fire burned low in her chambers, Sansa sat at the edge of the bed, removing her boots. Jaime leaned against the wall, watching the snow swirl against the window. You didn't have to defend me, he said softly. Yes, I did. You've just made enemies you didn't need. She looked back at him. I've been making enemies since I was 11. This is nothing new. He walked over and sat beside her. They'll never fully trust me. She gave a sad smile. They don't have to. I do. And there it was, the quiet core of their bond. Not love born of passion or fairy tales, but love born from war and survival. A love shaped by scars, and choices made in the dark. He took her hand, kissed her knuckles softly, and rested his forehead against hers. I'd die for you, he whispered. Then live, she said, eyes shining. Live, and stay. They shared a kiss, warm, firm, and real. No more hiding. No more questions. But peace, as always, was fleeting. A raven arrived the next day, its wings heavy with snow and warning. The seal of the dragon. A message from the queen. Surrender the traitors. Or face the wrath of fire. Jon returned that evening, his face carved with worry. He read the letter, then looked at Sansa. You've brought war to our gates. Sansa didn't flinch. Then let it come. Jaime stood beside her. We'll fight, she said. For love. For the North. For what's right. And with that, the pieces were set. Fire would come. Ice would answer. But for once, Sansa Stark was not alone. The skies above Winterfell turned dark far too early. The snow thickened, the air became crueler, and the cold bit deeper than it had in years. But the tension hanging in the courtyard was sharper than the frost. Jon stood at the center of it all, holding Daenerys's letter with tight fists. He had said nothing since reading it aloud. Arya leaned against the stone wall, sharpening her dagger without a word. Bran, silent as ever, simply watched. Sansa didn't flinch as she addressed the lords gathered in the great hall. She wants us to bow. To give her what she calls traitors. Me. And Ser Jaime. Tormund spat into the fire. The Dragon Queen never cared for our kind. She just needed bodies for her war. She bled with us, Jon said at last, stepping forward. She lost everything to defeat the Night King. And now she wants to burn Winterfell to ashes to get back at me for walking away, Sansa shot back. Tell me, Jon. Does that sound like someone who deserves loyalty? Jon's eyes searched hers. He wanted to argue. Wanted to defend Daenerys. But he couldn't. Not anymore. He had seen too much. Her smile had turned to stone. Her warmth to fire. Somewhere along the way, love had become conquest. Jaime remained quiet through it all. He stood behind Sansa, not hiding, not afraid, just waiting. The Jaime of old might have tried to fight the room for his honor. This Jaime knew that silence was sometimes louder than any sword. Finally, Jon turned to Jaime. "You love her?" Jaime looked him straight in the eye. "Yes." "You think you deserve her?" "No," he said. "But I'll fight beside her until my last breath." Jon studied him, then gave a slow nod. "Then fight you will." Preparations began before the night fully fell. Winterfell had faced darkness before. It had stood against the dead. But dragons? That was a different kind of fear. Daenerys had two left, and only one had been seen in recent months. The other, it was said, had vanished beyond the narrow sea. No one knew if it would return. But the one she rode, Drogon, was more than enough. The North would not surrender. That decision was made. As the hours passed, Arya approached Sansa in the God's Wood, where the snow lay untouched and silent. "You really love him," Arya said softly, as if still trying to believe it herself. "I do," Sansa replied, kneeling near the heart tree. "Not for who he was. But for who he chose to become." Arya nodded, then looked away. "I never thought I'd see the day where the Kingslayer fought for House Stark." Sansa smiled faintly. "Neither did I." A few steps away, Jaime leaned on his sword, watching them. When Arya noticed him, she stepped closer, stopping just in front of him. "You hurt her." "I'll end you," she said in a whisper that felt more like a promise. Jaime didn't smile. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "Fair enough." That night, as the wind howled against the windows and the fires burned low, Sansa and Jaime stood alone in the highest tower of Winterfell, watching the skies. "She will come," Sansa said. "With fire." Jaime nodded. "And we'll meet her with ice." She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to stay. You know that, right? You could ride south. Hide." "I'm done running," he replied. "For the first time, I know what I'm fighting for. I'm not leaving you, Sansa. Not again. Not ever." A tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being truly chosen. Not as a pawn. Not as a trophy. But as an equal. The next day, a raven circled overhead. Its shadow passed over the snowy courtyard. And then they heard it. A distant roar. Low. Thunderous. Ancient. People froze. Children were rushed inside. The castle's bells rang once, twice, a warning. Drogon was coming. Atop the beast, Daenerys flew with fury in her eyes and vengeance in her heart. The last dragon queen. The breaker of chains. The one betrayed by love and loyalty alike. Sansa stood on the ramparts, her fur cloak whipping in the wind, her face calm. Beside her, Jaime drew his sword. Jon, Arya, and the rest of the North readied themselves for what would not be a battle, but a reckoning. The dragon's shadow stretched across the snow as it descended. Winterfell stood once more at the edge of fire and ice. And this time, love was at the center of the storm. Drogon came down like a thunderclap. Snow blasted into the air, villagers screamed, and the North braced for death. His wings beat once, sending a wave of heat and wind crashing over the courtyard. Sansa stood still, her eyes locked on the queen who descended from the saddle with fire behind her eyes. Daenerys looked like a storm, her silver hair wild in the wind, her cloak billowing like wings of her own. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The dragon's roar said everything: surrender, or burn. The silence between them stretched until Daenerys's voice, sharp and cold, shattered it. "You were warned, Lady Stark." Sansa didn't flinch. "And I answered." Daenerys's gaze shifted. "You betrayed the realm. You ran like a coward. You harbor a traitor. Jaime stepped forward, sword still sheathed. Then take me. Sansa's eyes widened, but she didn't stop him. Jaime stood tall, voice steady. If this is about me, leave her out of it. I came with her. I chose to. I've made my peace. Burn me if you must. But leave the North out of your war. Daenerys stared at him like she couldn't recognize the man speaking. You think this is only about you? She looked at Sansa again. You think you can defy the crown and still keep your castle, your people, your throne? You think love will protect you? Sansa stepped forward now, her voice like iron wrapped in silk. No. Love doesn't protect me. I protect me. And I protect the North. Drogon growled, smoke rising from his throat. The archers on Winterfell's walls raised their bows. Jon stood behind Sansa, sword already drawn, torn between blood and loyalty. Then Bran spoke. From his seat near the tree, his voice traveled across the courtyard, calm and unblinking. If you burn her, Daenerys, the realm will turn on you. Not because they loved her, but because they feared what you became. Daenerys looked at him, and for just a moment, a flicker of doubt passed through her. A moment. That's all it was. But Jaime saw it. He walked toward her, step by step, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. I know what it's like, he said. To believe you're owed something. To believe everyone else is wrong. I thought the same. I believed in Cersei until it was too late. Don't do the same. Don't become the very tyrant you fought to destroy. Daenerys's jaw tightened. Her hand gripped the hilt of her dagger. Drogon hissed. Love didn't make me weak, she said. It made me blind. Sansa moved beside Jaime now, the two of them standing united, ready. Then look, Sansa said. And see us for who we are. Not rebels. Not enemies. But people who have had enough of fire. Daenerys hesitated. Just then, Arya appeared beside Drogon. No one saw her coming. Her dagger was at Daenerys's back, cool and sharp. No one has to die today, Arya whispered. Daenerys turned her head slightly, enough to know the threat was real. She looked at Jon. Then at Jaime. And then, finally, at Sansa. And she stepped back. With a sharp whistle, she mounted Drogon again. Her voice rang out, this is not over. Drogon leapt into the sky, wings tearing the clouds, snow turning to steam beneath him. Winterfell exhaled. The North had survived. Hours later, in the quiet that followed, Jaime sat beside Sansa in her chambers. The fire crackled softly. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. She'll be back, she said. Then we'll be ready, he replied. You stood in front of her, she whispered. You would have died. He looked at her, eyes filled with truth. I would have. She turned to face him. Why? His answer was simple. Because you made me someone worth dying for. And then she kissed him, not with fear or desperation, but with certainty. With a love that had been forged in fire and frost. Jaime Lannister, once the Golden Lion, once the Kingslayer, had found his match not in a throne room, not in war, but in the quiet strength of a woman who had outlived her cages. Sansa Stark, once the little bird, once the broken girl in the south, had found her equal, not in a prince, but in a man who saw her for what she had become, and not what she had survived. The wars would come again. Queens would rise and fall. But in the heart of Winterfell, in a world too often ruled by blood and fire, something rare had taken root. Not just love. Understanding. And in that, they found peace, if only for a while.